Well, Dragon Age the Veilguard has finally descended upon us and brought thundering with it a maelstrom of discourse and controversy. You've heard it all ad nauseum at this point, so let's not waste any time. Let's just dive in, shall we? We're going to start with the big stuff. First and most importantly, who did this to Dorian? Who is responsible for this? Where is his barber? Did he want this? Is this what he asked for? Did he walk into the shop and was like, yeah, make it look like a platypus has died on my head? Unbelievable. You know, this is what's wrong with games today. It's all just, hi there, and welcome to yet another palette swap presentation with me, Fudj. My degree is in writing. My peers are insane. What you've just seen is the opening moments of a version of this video that will never be released. It's been banished to the fade, which is what I've taken to calling my recycling bin this week. This is because, as you can see, in this original version, I was hell-bent on diving deep into the many controversies and debates that have arisen in the wake of Dragon Age the Veilguard's release. It wasn't just Dorian's hair, I was gonna hit everything. The wooden beam that destroys a stone wall, Lucanus speaking Spanish and therefore seemingly confirming the existence of Spain in the Dragon Age universe. Everything. And then I remembered something. I hate discourse, and I'm sick of being subjected to people's opinions. I'm especially sick of being subjected to people's opinions right now because everyone discussing quite literally anything at all, anywhere on the modern internet has gone completely fucking insane. I go out of my way to write my videos to be as comically unhinged as I can, and you people have made this style impossible. Confession time. I have never, at any point in my life, in any situation, been the most well-adjusted person present. Until now. Only upon delving into the shrieking swamps of Dragon Age the Veilguard discourse am I capable of effectively role-playing a sane person. I have decided that this is how I win. The zany, off-the-wall twist on which this entire script is predicated is that I will find a way to talk about Dragon Age the Veilguard like a normal person. Like someone whose brain has not rotted away inside their oddly shaped head. Dragon Age the Veilguard is a game. This may come as a surprise to many of the new crop of lab-grown YouTubers who see it only as a weapon in some kind of monetizable online culture war, but there is in fact a game attached to the non-binary character who has you hyperventilating into a paper bag. If anything, you should be thanking them for the ad revenue. I'm sure they've made you a lot more money than most of your other dog shit slop. It is a game, and it is fine. The combat is fine, the writing is fine, the quests are fine. I am not so much a long-time Dragon Age fan as I am someone who played Inquisition in 2019 at the recommendation of a friend, enjoyed it, and have spent most of Veilguard's hype cycle going, oh yeah, it looks cool. But even as someone who has only played one other Dragon Age game to completion, I do find that some things in this release have left my eyebrows well and truly raised. Such as, for example, Dorian's hair. Seriously, what the fuck were they thinking? BioWare are a company of legendary renown who have fallen on somewhat hard times since the 2010s, as the higher-ups of parent company EA have increasingly needed to leech their creative life forces in order to power their earthly skin suits. You can see this most prevalently in 2019's Anthem, a game woefully out of an RPG developer like BioWare's wheelhouse that was surely thrust upon them under the pretense that it would make money. But you can also see it a little bit in Dragon Age the Veilguard, which was originally being developed as a single-player game, then pivoted to a multiplayer live service thing, surely at the behest of Andrew Wilson and his elite unit of giant talking insects, and then changed back yet again to a single-player RPG, the likes of which BioWare are known for the final release. As if that wasn't hectic enough, the game, alongside frequently changing staff and seeing a revolving door of writers and directors come and go from the project, has also experienced name changes. For the longest time it was known as Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and before even that, Dragon Age 4, Solus figures it out. Now, of course, it is Dragon Age the Veilguard. And, you know, if you wanted to call it Dragon Age Veilguard, that could have worked, but that may be the most despicable I have ever seen. What is it doing there? What purpose does it serve? If that were a person, I would bully it until it moved to a different country. Dragon Age the Veilguard's multiplayer DNA may explain some of the more perplexing facets of its game design, like the primers and detonators mechanic in combat, wherein some abilities prime enemies for detonation so that other abilities set them off, like huge explosions? I assume this is a thing that multiplayer games have, right? I don't actually play multiplayer games. I play shit like Pentiment and Talk to Walls. This multiplayer makeup has led many to criticise the Veilguard's map design, saying that these single-player levels feel reminiscent of Overwatch maps, more so than sprawling fantasy environments. I have many a nitpick with Dragon Age the Veilguard, but I think this does the game's level design a bit of a disservice. The game is perhaps more linear than some may have expected, but in the shadow of Dragon Age Inquisition's hinterlands, for example, I can't help but see Veilguard's levels as anything other than tight and focused, and perhaps a little too reliant on zip lines. Either that's another multiplayer thing, or it's a vintage transport department is made up of 12-year-olds. Most pressingly, I think these rather shallow comparisons have also prevented people from lavishing the praise upon Veilguard's art direction that it so richly deserves, because holy shit, this is maybe the most artistically impressive game I've seen since Elden Ring? I'm not just talking about visual fidelity here, I'm talking about art design and art direction. I found myself frequently stopping and just staring out into the ocean on the Ravane coast, or admiring the magical pseudo-neon lining the buildings of the streets of Docktown. Frequently, Veilguard is putting you in unique, inspired locations, pulled off with a finesse rarely seen anywhere else in the industry. Shout out in particular to the underwater prison in Lucanus's first companion quest. Good lord. It's not just about environments either. I have always loved the tarot card stylings of Dragon Age's character portraits, and I'm glad to see the source hasn't been lost here. With characters depicted in super weird, artsy ways that accentuate elements of their character in ways that can't be expressed with mere dialogue. I'm a big fan of yassified Harding looking like she's posing for a skincare ad, and Davrin presumably taking a YouTube thumbnail picture. Veilguard now also has these awesome animated cutscenes narrated by Varric after every main story and companion quest that are just dripping with that same style. A total treat for the eyes and ears every time. Everywhere you look, in every part of the game, something beautiful and incredible is being presented to you.
Making the rest of us look bad, Brooke. Not too bad.
I should text there. I'm going to be flirting with spoilers a bit throughout this video, by the way, but I won't be talking about or showing anything that happens from the final stretch onwards, nor alluding to or showing any major character deaths. I want to get this out of the way because there is a lot of hyperbole being thrown out about Dragon Age the Veilguard, and we're about to start going more in depth, but before we do, here's the bottom line from someone who, for the purposes of this video, is sane. It is messy, but not without merit. And given the development cycle it went through, I think the fact that an even half-decent game came out the other side is commendable. For better or for worse, Dragon Age the Veilguard is one of the more fascinating games I've played in recent memory, and I'm sure it will spark beautiful, worthwhile discourse for many years to come. It is truly divisive, and when I say divisive, I actually mean it. Critics love using the word divisive about things everybody objectively hates. I'm convinced game critics would call the Nazi Party divisive. They would call Paper Mario Sticker Star divisive. But here we have a game that is actually divisive, that has multiple camps of people all in different minds about the game. Some love getting an uncomplicated feel-good RPG in an era of gristle and grime. Some feel betrayed and think the game is not a good Dragon Age game and not as true an RPG as the series' pedigree or its marketing would suggest. Many feel that it's woke, and that appears to be about as far as their critical thinking skills can take them. Fact. It is a great time to be a cis white guy. Second fact. It is a terrible time to be one with basic empathy. Playing Dragon Age the Veilguard as a cis white guy feels a bit like being an undercover cop. Like at any point I'm supposed to rip my wire out, return to X the Everything app and tell all my superiors that Sweet Baby Inc. threatened to blow up the studio if they didn't give all the dragons top surgery scars. But would you believe me if I told you that I think anything, literally anything else, is more interesting and worthwhile to talk about? Well, I do. So let's talk about the companions. Dragon Age Inquisition, for all its faults, has one of the coolest and most well-rounded casts of side characters of any game like it. Blackwall has a story about identity that goes far deeper than typical Grey Warden fare about battle and honour and whatnot. Cole has an origin shrouded in mystery that even literal god in disguise Solus is fascinated by. Dorian has great hair. I hope nothing happens to it. I find that Veilguard's companions don't really compare. My favourite was probably Davrin, who I think has some of the most consistent and convincing voice acting, one of the most gripping companion quest lines, and a character conflict about creatures and their natural instincts versus what they can be taught that's really unique. I've rarely seen a character grapple with such themes in an RPG like this, and I found his musings on the ideas of nature versus nurture to be really refreshing and interesting. It's good stuff, but I think an exception to the rule. By contrast, Emmerich is a disarmingly polite necromancer who is novel in his politeness at first, but then you come to realise that that's his one setting. Even in moments of drama and tension where the stakes are high, he's still just kind of talking at everyone like he's going to offer them some tea. I was constantly hoping for there to be a moment where he takes it up a notch, where it feels like the character is really forced to grapple with the stakes of the task at hand, and that never really came. Nev is saddled with one of the more bland quest lines I can remember in a BioWare game, one that often felt indistinguishable from what I was doing in the main game, and then there's Lucanus. In the marketing, Lucanus was this unstoppable stone-cold killer, and as one of the game's former writers put it, a bisexual disaster. In the game, he's Puss in Boots. Come on, let's be real, you were thinking it too. I finished this game shortly after seeing Paddington 3 and had to Google whether or not it was actually Antonio Banderas. At a certain point in the game, you have a crucial decision to make that can drastically worsen Lucanus' life. His entire home city is under threat, and you can choose to prioritise saving somewhere else instead. I was expecting this to enrage him, or at least cause some real friction between me and him, but instead, he and the rest of the Antivan Crows, and we will talk about them later, would just kind of chill with me about the whole thing. The worst thing that happened is that he became hardened. Buddy, I wake up like that. And his supposed hardenedness, whilst cool in theory, just never felt like it changed my playthrough in any tangible way. This is all without mentioning the demon of spite that resides within him. If he didn't want to tear my head off for dooming his people, surely the demon of spite would take over and coerce him into taking revenge on me? Nope. He was kinda just a pretty nice guy who liked coffee and had a demon in him that never really did anything. Surprisingly limp characterization, I thought. This is emblematic of a wider issue present in your relationships with your companions. There is just a total lack of any meaningful friction. I'd say most of the rest of the game feels the same way too. Pretty toothless. You've surely seen the clips of the few instances of conflict that arise between your companions in this game, and yeah, they're not great. Very manufactured and trivial, resolved almost instantly, written with a tone that evokes some of the worst, most pandering moments in a Marvel movie, or a particularly lame Fire Emblem support conversation. It's for this reason that I actually like Tash a lot more than most. They're probably my second favourite companion behind Davrin, because yes, they're bratty and rude at times, and I kinda liked that. I liked being talked back to from time to time. It was nice to feel a bit of friction with one of my party members for once. And much like Davrin, this extends to the companion quest, Tash having the only other companion quest that really made me feel anything. There was genuine, compelling conflict in Tash's companion quest, which I felt was sorely lacking from almost every other aspect of the game's narrative. Overall, Dragon Age's companions have undergone a metamorphosis in this game not unlike an Animal Crossing villager. Which is to say, no one's grumpy enough. Swear at me, curse me out, call me mean things when I hit you in the head with a bug net, Emmerich. One thing the Veilguard's companions do comfortably have over Animal Crossing villagers though, is these digs. As if Veilguard's environment and art design was not already impressive enough, you actively see the companions move into the main base over time, see them further decorate and refurbish their living space, many of them eventually blossoming into something truly evocative of the character themselves. Again, if the dialogue and story isn't always doing them justice, the art direction is. Which is why it warrants its own segment. That's right, it's Fudj's Thing Within a Thing. Today's installment, My Cribs, Northern Thedas Edition. 7 companions make their homes in Dragon Age the Veilguard's lighthouse, personalising and perfecting them to suit their style. And today, in this very video, we're going to rank them worst to best. Here we go. In 7th and last place, typical, it's Lucanus. Lucanus dresses like Patrick Bateman, talks like Zorro, and lives like Harry Potter. Look at this depressing little stone cave he keeps himself locked away in. Apparently a big fan of the old hanging pots from the ceiling decor style and not much else. The place is crammed with candles, which I know my clumsy ass would not trust myself with. The absolute state of this shabby little clusterfuck. You wouldn't think Lucanus were a master assassin, you'd think he was a kick streamer. Number 6 is Tash. Tash certainly wins out in the space department, but loses out in the not feeling like I'm living in jail department. Nothing says prison of my own making quite like living under a giant grate, other than I guess the chains hanging from it. Did you do something, Tash? Is there something you want to fess up to? You got an orange jumpsuit stashed away somewhere? At the very least, there's a good amount of workout equipment and a lot of floor space for me to run around on when I get the zoomies. Number 5, Nev. It is often said that you shouldn't sleep where you work, lest it mess with your circadian rhythm, an adage that I can personally confirm is true. I'm not nocturnal, Fudj, for nothing. But I don't really see what other choice Nev has. What does she do? Just sprawl out on the desk? Sleep on the floor? I don't know. She's very tall. I'm not convinced this room could fit her long ways in any position. Maybe she just hangs from the ceiling like a bat at night. A suggestion, Nev. You have way too many books in this fucking place. You're not reading all that shit. Make a bed out of them. Throw a little cover over it, it'll have to do. This place is nice looking and it's got some great views out the window, but I don't know, man. Being surrounded by work all the time would be a total bummer. That's not to mention the wisps chirping away at you all day. I just know I'd end up eating one of them, just to see what happens. I'm thinking they taste like Powerade. Number 4, Balara. This place is cramped. It is tiny and claustrophobic, but architecturally I think it's very cool, save for the overabundance of mirrors. The amount of time she spends looking at herself, you'd think Balara would learn to be a bit less lame. I would maybe move the Nada Stirthalan aside to free up a bit more floor space, and I would definitely get a ladder in here because I am very interested in these wooden rafters up yonder. If this is stable, this is where I'm moving the bed personally. Don't sleep where you work, people. I love the wall patterns and lighting in here. I'm just less sure about the stuff Balara's decorated the place with. What use does she have for this penis enlarger? Number 3, Emmerich. Now we're getting into the good stuff. This is indisputable Sweet Digs territory. A generous amount of floor space, even when accounting for the spiral staircase, the only staircase that tells people you know how to find the clitoris. You've got a fireplace, a gorgeous velvet chair, a giant skull to remind people not to sit in the velvet chair lest they end up in the fireplace, but that upstairs is where it's at. Whew! That view from the balcony is something. There might not be a lot to do here, but when it comes to living space, sometimes style over substance can work. Catch me up here on this balcony 24/7, brooding over my long lost loves. Number 2 is Harding. Harding eventually decks her room out to look like how I imagine where everything from Etsy comes from. It's like a millennial's dream in here. This is how I think some of the reddest people in the world imagine left-wing activists live. The teal neon butterflies descending upon you with a slice of avocado toast at the top of every hour. There's not a ton of space, but that's for the sake of having a fucking foot bath in the middle. Come on. This place is gorgeous, if not perhaps a little too florally inclined, speaking as a hay fever sufferer. The giant flower hanging overhead does make me a bit uneasy, gives me a bit of an Elden Ring vibe. Kind of feel like I could wake up as a plant, but given the stakes, that would be the worst way to go. And number 1, Davrin. The true all-rounder. Elegant, spacious, but not overwhelming, with bar none the most astonishing view afforded to anyone in the lighthouse. Imagine how good taking a piss over this chasm would feel. Davrin also benefits from having yet another delectable fireplace, and the bed is even tucked specifically around the corner. There's a wall separating the bed from the workspace. The architects are learning! What really ties it all together though is what I call the stairway to heaven on the outside. This, ladies and gentlemen, right here at the top is Makeout Corner. Anyone who's ever been to a house party will know this is where everything goes down. Hookups, deep meaningful conversations, sustained projectile vomit. The most memorable moments of your life are happening here. About 7 feet above a bunch of pissed up pansexuals feeding alcohol to a griffin because it just seems like the funny thing to do. By the way, there were really people out there complaining about the art style of Dragon Age the Veilguard of all things, saying it looked like Disney or Pixar. Man, do you people not get enough photorealism in literally every other Western game? This is why Japanese games absolutely smoke us in the style category, just so we're clear, because we are absolutely allergic to anything different and new, weirdly defensive of the status quo of the hyper-realistic chasing of graphics that look like real life. It does not make you cool or mature. This shit looks great. Grow up. Or grow down. Okay, that's the last thing I have to say about art. Here's the first thing I have to say about the Palette Swap Patreon. It fucking rips. Early access to videos, names in video credits, access to voting on our Patreon exclusive listicles, and voting towards our monthly greatest hits category, and many other things, all there on patreon.com/PaletteSwapMag. We are a worker-owned outlet bent on delivering to you the true colours of gaming and journalism. We can make you laugh, we can make you think, we can certainly make you cry. Did you see where we rated Bowser's Inside Story on that Mario & Luigi RPG ranking? I, a person who did not vote on it, would like to complain. Being a worker-owned business, we're only able to run this ship thanks to the generous support of our backers on Patreon, so if you could consider joining them, we'd be forever grateful. We also have an Instagram, a Twitter, and perhaps most presciently in this day and age, a Blue Sky, so consider following us there for more of our antics, and thank you dearly should you take a little trip over to patreon.com/PaletteSwapMag. Perhaps a few eyes were rolled way earlier on in this video when I suggested that Dragon Age the Veilguard's writing is fine. Well, let me talk you down from that hyperbolic ledge for a moment, buddy. It is. We live in an era of online scrutiny so intense that it's almost impossible to divine the middling from the catastrophically dogshit. But Veilguard, whilst a mostly less nuanced, less contemplative game than its predecessors, absolutely has some regional managers in the words on a screen department pulling overtime. I personally am relieved to say that despite some of my misgivings about the game as a whole, without saying too much, I think the character of Solus, one of the most interesting and complex characters I've encountered in an RPG, comes out relatively unscathed. Whilst much of the world around him loses its depth, his beautiful bald head retains all of it. Perhaps this is to do with a final few hours that is genuinely a big step up from most of the rest of the game. Perhaps it's to do with him being isolated from so much of the world and cast, but I'm pleased to say that Solus remains a genuinely awesome character. I don't think anyone could make a good faith argument that Veilguard ruins or even particularly tarnishes him in any way. What the fuck is that? I'm not even going to touch that. Dragon Age the Veilguard is competently written. Everything makes sense. There's clearly defined character arcs and motivations, a satisfying conclusion, and even some fun little side bits in between. I really like this one conversation with Tash, Balara, and Isabella, a returning character from Dragon Age 2 who isn't very important, don't worry about it, where Isabella, after accidentally misgendering Tash, explains the concept of pulling a barv, wherein her and the rest of the Lords of Fortune do 10 push-ups to say sorry to someone in place of a verbal apology. This results in an honestly fascinating conversation that reveals a lot about the culture of the Lords and ruminates on the very nature of an apology. As Isabella says, some people mess up and get all dramatic. They make it all about them. God, I love that line. If my dad knew how to turn on a PS5 or introspect, this bit'd drive him crazy. I just can't help but feel, as I suspect a lot of people do, that despite what an epic setup this game gets with the conclusion of Dragon Age Inquisition and its Trespasser DLC, that it is surprisingly rote and straightforward. Hey, did you like Corypheus in Dragon Age Inquisition? No? Well, that's a shame, because we got 2 of them. Just another pair of moustache-twirling villains with nothing really interesting to say. It's not like every villain needs a level of moral greyness, and I suppose you could argue Solus is a or the villain of the Veilguard, but he can't carry the intrigue on his own, and these new dudes suck. They float around talking about how evil and powerful they are, call in a dragon, and leave. And almost the whole main story is just going to different parts of the world, fighting off a whole bunch of whatever faction is loyal to them out of plot convenience, seeing a scene or two that pushes the story forward a little bit, and then going back to base to do it all over again. When it's not fighting off the Venatori or whatever group of Kunari have been made evil so you can justifiably fight them in this Dragon Age game, it's gathering your companions, the Veilguard, and then fighting off the Venatori or whatever group of Kunari have been made evil so you can justifiably fight them in this Dragon Age game. It's all just in service of the same thing, gathering resources and strength for the final confrontation with the bad guys, but with less mechanics and intrigue and things to follow than, say, Mass Effect 2, which, as much as I love the ending of this game, it does feel very derivative of. There's very little intrigue or variety. I'm made to think of the story mission in Dragon Age Inquisition where you go to a fancy ball with the Orlais High Court to solve a murder mystery and foil an assassination attempt on an empress. Nothing like that here. Dragon Age The Veilguard is definitely more of an action game than an RPG. I wasn't paying much attention to the marketing cycle, but I know some feel led astray by that, though I do seem to remember the devs being relatively open about the fact that this would be a more action-oriented entry. I went in kind of expecting that, and maybe that's why I'm not as bitter about it as some others, but there definitely is a lack of choice and consequence when held up to the rest of the series. Not counting companion quests, I think I counted 2 major decisions I had to make in the main story before the final stretch. Even with my expectations tempered, I was surprised at how rarely I was given a narrative choice that felt particularly significant. Sid Meier once famously said, "A game is a series of interesting choices." But man, that Treviso plotline is whack. And right he was. Because for every fun little bit of side content I hinted at, like the conversation with Isabella earlier, there's a longer, chunkier bit of side content that just kind of drags its feet through a minefield. But like a really confusing minefield. Like there's also a guy there doing an Irish jig, and you're like, dude, what are you doing here in this minefield doing an Irish jig for? And he's like, precisely. And you're like, damn dude, you're kind of spitting, exciting Mac and Sale. And maybe Dragon Age The Veilguard, despite its dearth of meaningful choices, could still be replayable if some of the bigger quest chains were a bit more compelling. Instead, we mostly get stuff like what we get with the Antivan Crows in Treviso. This is the most spoilery section of the video. I'm going to be talking about a series of side quests that stretches through to late-ish. Skip to the time shown on screen if you don't want to hear about it, but as I say, it is only side content and it's not particularly thrilling stuff. The Antivan Crows in previous games have been built up as this elite cabal of ruthless spies, thieves and assassins. They do all kinds of messed up stuff. In the extended media, they run a prison where they keep people incarcerated for fun and torture. They employ child labour, kill other members for failure, presumably drink a lot of sparkling water. But in the Veilguard, they're all just kind of chill, even if, like me, you knowingly left their city susceptible to catastrophe. Far beyond being really nice all the time though, they're also kind of dumb. On 2 occasions, they missed the most obvious traitor imaginable. It's a constant plot thread throughout all the Treviso quests. There's a traitor in our midst. There's a traitor in our midst. Bro, I could have told them who the traitor was from my second conversation with them. Later on in the game, another traitor is revealed to have been a guy you met 5 minutes ago. I missed out on one of Lucanus's early companion quests because it got locked off by a main story quest with no warning, so I assumed he had to have been in that. I looked it up. Doesn't look like it. I looked him up on the wiki. No trace of him appearing at any point before this late game side quest where they're all talking about a traitor. He saunters in all high and mighty, talking down on everyone, leaves, and then, shock horror, he's the traitor 5 minutes later. Well, one of 2, anyway. And he flies into this confounding, moustache-twirling monologue, and I actively took down a note at this point that read, "Bro, what the fuck is going on with this Treviso plotline? I don't know who you are, and I don't care." A little writing tip, the traitor should never be a character introduced 5 minutes ago. I don't get how something could be so predictable, yet so bewildering at the same time. And it's not just prior characterization of the Antivan Crows that Veilguard plays fast and loose with, but also characterization of Tevinter as a whole. The Tevinter Imperium is known throughout the world as a deeply unfair and unequal society. Characters have talked about it all throughout the series, how hated it is the world over, and specifically how it's the only region in the world yet to abolish slavery. Tevinter is known to be particularly discriminatory against elves, whose ancestral home they ravaged back in the olden days, and who make up a vast majority of their slave population. Almost none of this comes up in Veilguard, despite being the Dragon Age game set in Tevinter. There is one line I can think of in the whole game that referenced elven slavery, and while I did not play as an elf, I've seen a lot of people who did complaining that they encountered none of the prejudice or racism they were expecting. What are you doing, BioWare? Gamers love racism. As I said earlier, Dragon Age the Veilguard is more of an action game than an RPG. Certainly more elbow grease and brain juice has gone into ensuring that you have more options with your fists than you do with your tongue. An approach that, frankly, could have resulted in some better romance scenes, but I digress. I'm talking about combat. Combat in Dragon Age the Veilguard is cool. Even playing as a mage myself and spending much of my combat in the back lines, I was pleasantly surprised at the fluidity of game feel here. Every button press feeling impactful and satisfying, almost every ability unique and interesting. I made like the daintiest Kunari possible and I still felt like a total killing machine. I got hooked on the feeling of blowing dudes up. I got addicted to violence. Even outside of combat, I'd see like a wagon or something and just... So it's a shame then that Veilguard's fundamentally cool combat is let down by its enemy variety, because it feels like there's like 5 different enemy types you'll be fighting throughout the whole game, and that makes even the coolest combat get old fast. In particular, Veilguard is totally lacking in big boss monster enemies. Almost every time a side quest hypes up a big scary enemy at the end, it's a dragon. You talk to a demon and destroy its thralls all over the world so you can get access to its lair, and it's a dragon. You finally find out what's causing the corruption in the crossroads, and it's a dragon. I get that it's Dragon Age. I don't need fucking Mothra to show up. I mean, I'd like it, but I don't need it. But it just speaks to a lack of enemy variety, I think. At the very least, the player has variety in their options. At the end of a quest in Ravane, I found a potion belt that removed the healing effects from all your potions, replaced them with charge for your ultimate attack, and had the effect that you would restore to full health upon using your ultimate attack. I remember thinking that was cool, that one piece of equipment could change up your playstyle so drastically. But does that do enough to negate the lack of enemy variety to really push you to play any differently? I'm not so sure. Dragon Age the Veilguard is a fine game. It has some things that are good, and some things that are bad. Wow, that was hard. I think my nose and eyes are bleeding. And in this age of online discourse tantamount to the Red Sea being parted by a 50-year-old porn addict, we might do well to remember that sometimes things are just fine. and that's fine. I greatly look forward to the impending release of another Western RPG with diverse characters, so we can all do this all over again. So, what did we learn today? Well, you were likely already my target audience when you clicked on this video, so probably nothing. Oh well, at least we got some good jokes in. This whole being the straight man thing was exhausting and annoying. I cut out so many insane lines all for the sake of being ironically coherent. I had a great bit where I was going to ask who you think I voted for in the 2024 US presidential election and then shoot a woman of colour with a laser beam.
You need something straight together? Just ask.
But it went totally against this video's thesis of not engaging with all the culture war stuff, which I totally failed to do anyway. I'm sorry, the jokes come too easy. Cutting this out was the closest thing I have to restraint. I have been Fudj. Next time, I will be more deranged. Do your civic duty, give a game a 6 out of 10, return to normality. See you next time. Thank you to our legendary tier patrons: Josh Hanauer, Serial Law Obeyer, Kinslow TN, Bijan Imadi, Philip Tinner, Strawberry, Yo Adrian, War Crimes Uwu, and Dr. Cruiser. As ever, we appreciate any support you can give to us at patreon.com/PaletteSwapMag. This is the last time I'm going to see you on this channel for 2024, so I also say a Happy New Year, and may 2025 be, I don't know, less insane for 5 minutes? That'd be cool. See you then.